Hi, I'm a professor and I study pop culture in the 1950s.
What was it really like for Elvis?
Well, he really loved singing and dancing for those wonderful beatnik fans. They really liked his swaying hips and his quivering lip.
Of course, their parents must have not been too fond of him.
No, they thought that rock and roll was devil's music and it set a bad example. He still sang for all those dancers and young teenagers.
And they sure do enjoy to hear his music. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Hello, I am a professor that studied Eisenhower and his presidency.
So, Professor, what is the organization of NATO?
Well, NATO stands for North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It's a treaty that guards the freedom and security of its members through political and military means. It promotes democratic values and builds trust among its members to avoid conflict in the long run. It is committed to peaceful resolutions, but has the military means to undertake crisis management.
Professor, do you think that Eisenhower was right in ending the Korean War?
We were warring on a static front. The casualties we had been receiving were too high, as nothing was resulting from them. As Eisenhower said, small attacks on small hills were getting us nowhere.
How did ending the Korean War benefit Eisenhower and the country?
Well, even when the war was over, the U.S. still had police control that kept the North Korea from imposing on the South. By ending the war, the U.S. had shown its willingness to battle aggression in Europe. It must have been easier to organize the NATO military in Europe.
Aside from Korea, Eisenhower was acutely trying to end tensions with the Soviet Union. How did the death of Stalin affect the Cold War?
Khrushchev and Eisenhower tried to negotiate ways to make the war less dangerous.
President Eisenhower was known to be a firm supporter of civil rights, going so far as to get involved in the Little Rock crisis. What were his thoughts on segregation?
He thought that there must be no second-class citizens in this country. That's all there was to it. African Americans have rights, just like everybody else in the country.
Thank you for your time, Professor.
Hello, I'm a professor that has been studying McCarthyism. McCarthy accused the State Department of being filled with card-carrying communists.
Was he suggesting that the Truman administration might have been falling to defend the nation's security?
Yes.
And he thinks the nation was sold out by traitors in the federal government?
Yes.
Since he's criticizing all these so-called communists, would it be correct to say he's a supporter of the Cold War?
Yes. His campaign is mainly aiming to silence critics of the Cold War.
Was his campaign successful?
It was. He had a lot of support from other organizations, including the American Legion, Chamber of Commerce, and other prominent leaders. This campaign was known as McCarthyism, hence the name.
I see. It's only a pity that so many civil rights organizations were being persecuted. So was his accusations ever false?
The final accusation he made was directed at some high-ranking officers in the army of plotting subversion. He couldn't prove those charges, and in the end, he just looked so disoriented. That basically ended his career, and his life went downhill from there.
I see. Very interesting. Thank you for being with us today. We really enjoyed hearing from you. I am a professor that studied Truman. Truman was the 33rd President of the United States, and he was in office from 1945 to 1953. He took over the presidency after Franklin D. Roosevelt passed away on April 12, 1945.
That sure was a death that caused the United States to really mourn their president.
Yes, it truly was.
Now let's get down to the real presidential experience. What were one of the most important issues that faced the country during your presidency?
Well, I would definitely have to say the most important issue that Truman faced during his presidency was the Korean War.
I would agree as well. Now, what can you tell me about the Korean War?
Well, during World War II, the Korean Peninsula was divided into a communist north and an American-occupied south at the 38th parallel, as many know. The Korean War in 1950, when the communist north invaded the south and it fell hopelessly to communist control. This is when the United States stepped in to help. General Douglas MacArthur commanded his troops to hold back the invasion from North Korea. Korea had never really been that important to the United States, but at this point in time, the U.S. was very worried about communism and the threat it posed to the rest of the world. General MacArthur and his troops pushed the North Korean army north and soon recaptured the South Korean capital of Seoul. But then MacArthur got a little too arrogant and kept pushed the North Korean army back all the way up into the northern provinces of North Korea. Meanwhile, the People's Republic of China secretly sent an army to help out North Korea and surprise the U.S. troops. Soon after, Truman decided to fire MacArthur after he did not follow the very specific instructions Truman gave him. This almost caused Truman to become impeached. General Ridgway took over MacArthur's position, which he thought would improve the army greatly. Unfortunately, Truman could not bring the Korean War to a close, but almost immediately after Eisenhower became president, a peace treaty was signed and in the Korean War. The Korean War, however, did not reunite North and South Korea, and they still remain a divided nation today.
Wow, that's a great background on what really went down during that war. Now I have one more question.
Sure.
Who are the Dixiecrats that opposed Truman's position on civil rights?
The Dixiecrats were Southern Democrats who opposed Truman's position on civil rights. They even caused a split in the Democratic Party because of so many conflicting views.
Wow, that's pretty tough. What were Truman's civil rights views?
Well, many people did not agree that discrimination should be banned in all public areas, including the army and businesses. Truman felt he should really just stick to his morals and issue an executive order banning any discrimination in these types of places. This caused many U.S. citizens to become angry with his decision, causing the Dixiecrats to evolve.
Wow, I thought many Americans would have supported his ideas, but I guess we need to take into account the frame of mind many Americans had in that point of time.
Yes, I'm so glad things have changed since then.
Yes, me too. Thank you for taking the time to answer a few questions about his presidency.
Of course, thank you for having me. And our final guest speaking about Ms. Rosa Parks. Hello and welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me here today.
Now, we all know that Parks has been a strong civil rights activist working with local NAACP and all.
Yeah, she has always fought for civil rights. I'm sure you're meaning to ask me about her bus boycott.
Yes, I am. I would love to hear all about that day and how it happened from her point of view.
Well, sure, I always thought of it as a very bold yet necessary decision. It was December 1st, 1955. She had gotten on the bus after work, and she just wanted to go home peacefully when the bus got more and more crowded. Parks sat in about the middle of the bus, but behind the seats reserved for whites, of course. A white man boarded the bus, and James Blake, the driver, told her and 3 other African Americans to move back as to let the white man be seated in front of them. There were no other seats, and she was just tired, resting her feet. But the Jim Crow laws wouldn't allow her to sit when there was white people who wanted to sit.
So that when she told them that she wouldn't move, right, and launch the bus boycott?
Well, she wasn't the only one who refused to move from her seat, but yes. That was when she told them she wouldn't move. Parks had a legal cause for why she wouldn't move. The laws stated that blacks only had to move for a white person if there was another seat open that they could move to. Now, since there were none, she wanted to stay in her seat.
She was arrested, right? Thrown in jail?
Yes, she was, but not for very long, and she got a fine of $10. But Parks wasn't the only one, like I said. Claudette Colvin was the first. She was a young girl who also got arrested for not giving up her seat, just like she did.
What did she say when Blake told her to move?
Parks simply said no.
And so that's why she was, and that's what she was arrested for, saying no?
Yes. People's reaction to her arrest was what sparked many people's motivation to boycott the buses. African Americans were the main suppliers of revenue for the buses, and without them riding it, the bus company lost thousands of dollars. They carpooled, took cabs, biked, or even walked just to boycott the buses.
So how long after was it that the bus segregation became illegal?
Almost a whole year later, on November 23rd, 1956, it was declared unconstitutional. After people saw what they had accomplished, other southern cities, African Americans began to refuse moving to the back of the bus.
So it does look like she was the spark that set bus desegregation off. That is quite a story. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing her story.
If you do your homework, you won't get stressed.
Do 45 minutes to an hour of APUSH notes every day. Don't procrastinate.
Don't ever get behind on your notes because you may never catch up.
Don't be afraid to ask Mr. Nygaard questions.
Your book is your best friend. Take it everywhere with you.